objectives of budgeting and financial planning are forecast of enterprise financial performance, forecast results in what-if scenarios, variance analysis abilities, KPI and monitoring system in enterprise performance dashboard, targeting on increasing of profitability of the company. Budgeting is a module in 1C ERP application. It provides forecasting of financial statements, different budget models options, budget preparation process, after filling of budget forms, and other solutions. Let me show you the planning levels in a company. Enterprise strategy is the top level of planning. It has planning horizon of 5 and more years. Strategic, mid-term, and short-term planning are the budgeting level with different analytical dials and periods. Operational and order level plannings are the operational level of inventory planning. Here are the planning tools for these levels. Enterprise strategy developed outside the system, but all other levels are covered by the functionality of the system. We have all needed documents in our application in budgeting and inventory planning module. And for the order level planning, we have wide variety of different types of order. The financial indicators and KPIs can be shown in performance dashboard as different charts. Let's see what the budget and budgeting is. The budget is a plan of financial indicators of a company, like income, expenses, assets, and other, in a period interval, year, quarter, month, maybe week. Budgets are corporate tools that represent financial plans and forecasts for future operations. They are used for planning, monitoring, and measuring the performance of a company. The budgeting approach in a business process of a company are bottom-up, top-down, and two-way approach. Top is the high level. The top managers define consolidation reports and global targets on the level. Bottom is the level for end users, like to-do scenarios. The middle and low-level management and the employees with their local targets are on this level. The 1C ERP supports all of these approaches. Let's see what the budgets consist of, the building blocks of budgeting. First of all, it needs to say that usually budgeting is accounted in Excel without any automation tool and system. Major part of budgeting users are familiar with abilities of Excel, so we designed our solution looks like Excel. Here there are different types of tables, different position of dimension and budget item in them. But we can see common types of these blocks of the tables. Dimension, period, budget flow item, budget balance item, amount, scenario, formula, derived item, and all the budgeting blocks for this. And we made them in the 1C ERP as master data elements. Here is a budgeting architecture scheme. Budgeting model is a container of the budget forms and reports. We do budget profiles which describe the hierarchy of budget items and dimensions. Then we create the budget entry forms with plan data, and we have data for budget reports and plan fact analysis. Another interesting scheme is the scheme of budget balancing model principles. Here we can see the balance indicators with connecting them through transactions. The principles of double entry is observed. Some value from one element of balance goes to another element. So our budgeting user uses balance indicators as the budget balance items and a flow transaction as the budget flow item. Let's talk about budgeting implementation approach. The approach depends on the scope of the business requirements for the budgeting. A simple model provides only cash flow statements for the spending limits of cash. A full-scale model provides complex and closed system of mutually connected budgets. And of course, our ERP application provides balanced options between simple and complex models. Here we can see the scheme of example for the complex budgeting model with balance sheet at the end of the budgeting process. All the rectangles are the budget forms with links between each other. In the real enterprise implementation, the budgeting model can consist more than 50 budgets form or more. Let me go to the application and show you the master data and some settings in the budgeting subsystem of 1C ERP World Edition. First of all, we need to enable a budgeting subsystem. To do it, go to Master Data and Settings menu, then choose Budgeting and Planning. Here you can see these settings. The inventory planning options are also placed here. Disable budgeting or inventory planning if it is needed. Then I will show you the settings and catalogs of the budgeting subsystem. Let me go to the menu called Budgeting and Planning. This panel consists the main catalogs of master data of budgets. Let me show you the budgeting model settings. Here is the model list. We can use several budgeting models at the same time. Budgeting model includes budget profiles and the budgeting process route and cash flow limit settings. The model describes the period and using of analytic planning by companies or by business units, and it includes option for approve budget entry form documents. Take a look at the budget flow item lists. The budget items are not belong to particular budgeting model. They are common for all budgeting models. The plan data is also common for all budgeting models. It allows to use different models by time to time with common data. Budget flow item is a budget analytic designed for planning flow or business operation and displaying in budget reports. Budget entry forms requires entering data by budget flow items. Budget items have several analytical dimensions. The same view is in other budget items. All of them has 6 dimensions and some options like a currency mode and others. Let me show you what the budget item dimension is. The budget item dimensions are analytical sections for budget flow or balance or non-financial items, which are detailed with planned and actual data. Dimensions can be of various types: goods, cash flow items, partners, and others. It makes sense to plan in the dimensions what are in transactions. Otherwise, you can get plans, but you can't collect actual data reports, because actual data has no such dimensions in it. Let's see what the budget balance item in a scheme. Budget balance item is a budget analytic designed for planning balance and displaying in budget reports. It is determined as opening balance from actual balance sheet statement plus turnovers by budget flow items. Systems gets opening balance from actual data and adds to them amount from flow items which are connected to this balance item. So we have a planning close balance amount. Let's see the other budget items types. We have non-financial item. It is useful for situation when you need to set data like coefficients and other non-financial indicators. For example, number of employees, number of stores, customer satisfaction ratio, prices, and others. These coefficients are described by frequency of using and lifetime period. They can be calculated manually or get by custom query. Other budget item is derived item. It is an element of the budget profile structure that contains calculated indicators based on a formula. The sources of amount for calculation can be budget flow or balance item and non-financial items. Budgeting helps companies to forecast their financial states in a short or long-term perspective. We need some assumption for forecasting. It needs to assume future exchange rates and sales turnovers. We need the global dimensions to keep the data in this what-if mode. For that purpose, we use a budgeting scenario. It allows you to use different scenarios of plans depending on interval or external factors. And it allows you to have optimistic or pessimistic scenario, for example. Now we are ready to use all of this master data of budgeting to create a budget form for planning and use them as a report in the same time. This is a budget profile. It is a catalog element. Budget profile is a template for hierarchical structure of budget items. Other elements, structure of the budget report and entry form. The last one element of budgeting we need to know is the document budget entry form. Budget entry form is a document with a form of entering data for the certain budget profile, budgeting scenario, company, and business unit. With budget entry form, you can create budget turnovers for the plan amounts. Now let's see all of these features in the application. Go to Budgeting and Planning Settings and Catalogs, and then open the Budget Profile list. The list is opening with Budgeting Model Filter. Let me create new one and show you how is simple for modeling. Firstly, we need to enter the name of for the budget. Let it be cash flow. Then we need to choose the type of profile. Will it be for entering data or only for report? Checkbox use to enter plan is for it. Planning method. Fixed period or rolling planning. Period of budgeting can be from day to year. Let it be by default month. Then go to the budget structure. From the left side we can see the list of the elements for design. There are items, dimensions, and other. We can place title to the clear form to the right. Use drag and drop for it. It is simple to do. Let me name it Cash Flow 2. Here we can use some parameters for template records. Let's choose reporting period. When it places it like a code, string on Russia code. Because the code in 1C ERP is still on Russian, but we are working at translation of the code too, and it will be on English someday. Well, now set a new table in the right part from the left. Here we see three types of table. It depends on how we want to place budget items in the table, in the rows, in the columns, or as a complex table. Let me add the budget flow item from basic model cash flow tree to the rows, and then add a month period to columns. Now we will see more details about budgeting items at the right part. Just click on the item in structure. We can rename it and drill down to item and see the dimensions there. We can set method of filling data to this item manually or by budgeting data. Then place dimension cash flow item to the structure. We can place it to columns or rows. The dimensions may have fixed value list, or it would be defined in entry form later. We can drag and drop elements in structure of a budget form. We can preview a template of a report and set some colors and fonts in order to change its design. To do that, click Appearance Setting. We are allowed to select cells and to change appearance here by right mouse click. Let me save our profile and check it. Here is two buttons for it: Create Entry Form and View Report. Let me create new budget entry form. While we are creating profile, we can preview document form from budget profile. But in the default business scenario, the document should be created from the document list or from a budget process task. Set scenario, company and business unit there. And go to budget panel. Here we see table of the budget. We can add new dimension from the list. Let's choose operating activity and find here payment for purchase of materials, and add one more cash flow item. Find the payments for goods purchase item. Now we are ready to set plan data. Just enter new amounts in the cells. We can use context menu to copy value to the cell or add some note to describe the amount to approval person. And then we are ready to press pause and close button of the entry form. Now let me generate the budget report. Choose the scenario, currency and period and press generate. And we can see the amount which we placed before. Then drill down to the source document from the report cell. Just click on the amount. The trial balance report opens automatically. Let me drill down to the recorder. Here we can see the source document with the value, and we can open it by click on its name. And we came back to the document which we did before. It's an advantage of our system to drill down to the source document from any reports. Let me come back to presentation and show you the scheme of data source for the budget items. Data sources are defined by types of budget items. You are allowed to define existing data structure as data source for budget flow item, budget balance item, and non-financial items. The custom query is also available as a data source for them. Derived item calculates using all kinds of budget items, so it can aggregate all data sources together. The data source for budget items are financial accounting, the data from charts of accounts, operational accounting, the data from business transactions, inventory plans, other budget items themselves. Here we must stop and talk about ability of our system to use some different accounting of financial accountings. They can be local accounting by national standards, management accounting by enterprise standards, and international accounting by IFRS standards. If you need more than one chart of accounts, then you need to set multiple charts of accounts options to on mode, and then create all charts of account you need. All of this accounting can be data source for budgeting. Actual data query rules is workplace for calculation of actual data by budget items using different data sources. There are two approaches how to define the actual data query rules. The first starts from budget items. We choose item and then create data source for it. The second starts from data source. We choose the source and then set item for it. Let's see the form actual data query rules in real application. Go to Budgeting and Planning, Settings and Catalogs, and open then the actual data query rules. Here we can switch between mode of using by budget items or by data sources. In by budget items mode, we see the list of flow and balance items. And in by data sources mode, we see the sources. Operational accounting turnovers is source for budget flow items. It is business transactions list. Operational accounting balance is source for budget balance item. It is assets and liabilities items list. And financial accounting is ledger chart of accounts for budget flow and balance items. For any string in this workplace, we can create a rule to collect data to the item from the source. Double-click on the item and press Create button. The rule has different settings to get value and mapping dimension from source data to budget item. Now we are returning to my slides and I will tell you about important part of budgeting for large companies with many users of budgeting subsystem. It is not enough to set up all forms for input and reports. The budgets have links and sequences between each other. So we need to use budgeting preparation process in a company to reach success in planning. The budgeting preparation process gives us organization and coordination of the process of budgeting tasks for specific performers. Budgeting process is a loop of steps. The steps define the action to be performed. The following actions can be performed: entering operational inventory plan, entering in budget entry form, approval of the budget, setting the limits of cash flow, and others. Here is a scheme of the cycle of the budget process. We start from targets and go to budget forms. Then we keep the first version and make adjustment documents when it must be changed. And at the end of planning period, we make variance analysis and go on to start new cycle of budgeting to the next period. Now let's see budgeting preparation process in the application. Go to budgeting and planning, setting and catalogs, and open then the budgeting model, basic model. The budgeting process road is a part of budgeting model. Setting of budgeting process road is creating hierarchical description of sequentially or simultaneously performing steps. Here are some groups of steps in them that describe the process. The system allows you to automatically repeat the process and define its frequency. The step defines the template of settings for task to user. Here we can see some of these settings. Who is assigned to the task, the system itself or a user? The duration and the certain actions of the task. Tasks after their creation from the steps allow you to quickly perform the action and drill down to the budget entry form document or start budget report to control the data of planning. In approval task, you can view the budget entry form and the summary budget reports that it affects. The budget process can be run from budgeting and planning menu as a document by budgeting model steps. It shows the status of all steps. Budgeting process chart is the interactive report that draws diagram of Gantt. We can see the current status of the budgeting task as a plan fact chart in this report. We use some settings for it. The second part of this presentation is the Treasury management in 1C ERP World Edition. Treasury is a department responsible for managing cash resources. Its functions: operational management of the financial flows, organization of relationships with banks and other financial institutes, control over the company's financial and cash gaps, financial risk management. Its goals: financial support of the activities of other departments, minimization of financial risks and operating expenses, maximizing the result of investments for available financial resources. The treasury management in our system consists: payment request documents, cash forecasts like as interactive report form, cash flow limits control option, and financial instruments for save and earn money. Here is a scheme of payment request workflow. Due to main scenario, initiators who apply for payment need to create a payment request and specify future payment due date. System performs limit control and then the payment request can be approved or not approved. When the treasury allocated amount by accounts as sources for the payment and then creates a payment issue note. Let's talk about cash forecast features. It shows daily cash balances and gaps. It shows planned issues and receipts. It allows you to move requests forward and backward between bank accounts and by days. Undo and redo options help you to track all user actions with payment requests. It's helped to get a simulation of scenarios and return to main scenario. Cash forecast has flexible grouping of user interface elements in workplace and in the reports. Now let me show you the payment request and cash forecast abilities in 1C ERP. Firstly, we need to close all panels from last demonstration. Just click Close All button in Context menu. When we go to Master Data and Settings menu, then choose Treasury and Settlements and see options for cash forecasting. As we see, the payment request options is enabled. It is the main options to use payment requests and cash forecasts. If you do not need the cash management and forecasting, just disable it. When we go to Treasury menu and open Payment Request list, the business transaction for payment can be different. We see the list of transactions in Create button. Let me create the new one with payment to vendor. The company and business units are set automatically. Set the payment date to some future date and set the payment type from any to bank account. Then choose bank account. User has to set recipient to pay. Let it be vendor alpha. Set the amount to pay and then go to Payment Explanation panel. Here we need to choose Payment Object. The cash flow item would be set by default value specified in the contract. Let's check the contract states. We can drill down from document to any object by pressing Open button in the field. Here is the contract record. Go to Accounting Information panel and see the cash flow item by default value. Let's return to Payment Request form. We are ready to post and close the document. The status of the request is still not approved. Let me show you how the treasurer can approve the payment request. The system has workplace for it. Treasury requests for approval. Here is our new payment request. Click Approve Request button. You can also press Reject Requests, but for seeing example of cash forecast, we will press Approve button. We can hide the approved request by setting status filter. Look at the list only to approve mode, choose Not Approved. The filter panel will be helpful when number of requests is big. If the treasurer wants to approve only high priority requests, he needs to set priority filter. Look at our new payment request in cash flow form. Open Treasury and Cash Forecast. We can see the amount of our request by due date in Cash Outflow is not allocated line. If we click there, we will see detail in bottom part of the form. He will look at the payment request and can drill down to it. Bank account what we set in a request list is the wished account for pay, but treasury can think else. He can check cash gap in the bank accounts per days. Then press for payment button and it set auto allocation for requests. The wished bank account will be priority. Let me click button. Here we see the request is now in bank account line. The cash forecast form has three modes of view. Request to cash forecasts. We can drag and drop requests by day and bank accounts, which undo and redo abilities. Cash forecast and requests by day. Click by day and see all requests and scheduled payments in it. And requests list methods, and this is a simple list for payments. Look at the settings of cash forecasts. There are more actions and settings. Here we can adjust the display mode of scheduled payments from orders and contracts and set other options. Let's come back to presentation and see other abilities. Some more features of cash management in a company are tool for transfer, deposit and lending cash. Transfer request for payment between payment dates and accounts. Splitting request for payments by payment dates and accounts. Transfer of cash between accounts within company. Transfer of cash between companies. Currency conversions. Managing external financials of loan money to cover gaps in cash. Let me tell you about features of the cash flow limit control in 1C ERP. Determination of different time fans of limits: day, weeks, decades, month, quarter, half year, year. Flexible limit analytics by partners, by contracts, and by other analytics. You can set a total limit for the cash flow item and additional limits for the other analytics. Here is a scheme that shows how cash flow limits map to each other. Example of a possible relationship between limits of different dimensions and periods. All of these limits will work together. Budget limit control can be informative, non-blocking or blocking, but stops any cash issues. Another view of cash flow limits control. Here is a visualization scheme of amount limits by different dimensions. How system react on an axis of limits by different types. Let me go to the application and see how cash flow limits works. As usual, we go to Master Data and Settings menu, check options in Treasury and Settlements, cash forecastings. Now we see at limits usage options. It can be not used. The limits are disabled. By document of cash flow limits. The simplify approach for settings limits by posting special documents. Limits can be only per month and cash flow items and without any additional options. And by budgeting data, the full-scale approach of setting limits. We choose the budget by budgeting data mode and close form. The settings of the limits is located in the budgeting model. Let's go to the budgeting and planning menu and settings and catalogs. Open budgeting model list, choose model for limits and go there to cash flow limits tab. Here is the list of budget flow items with their options for limits. You can define here frequency, scenario, limit type for information only or for permitting. The hierarchy of dimensions from budget flow items to check in payment requests. The budget flow item must have actual data query rules for collect data from cash transactions. Earlier, we did budget entry form and payment request, and they are already in cash flow limits control scheme. Look at the report cash flow limits. The report can be generated from this workplace or from report panel or from payment request. Here we can see some amount and drill down to the source documents of them. Let me try. In this detail report, we see the document what we created before. Let me open the payment request and make copy of it. Click More Actions, Copy. Set new date and edit amount to exceed the limits. Let me try to post the document. Oh, we have received an error and a message log. The cash limit control works. We are allowed to set other limits options to post the document. Let me do it. And now let me return to the report again. Click Reports, Cash Flow Limits from this document. Now we see the other limits amount and percentage of it in a report. Let me sum up the abilities of budgeting and treasury in 1C ERP World Edition. The application has flexible implementation options of budgeting models, simple or full scale. Budget process management, bottom up, top down, or two-way. Reference to operational planning, cash flow limits control at the payment request, cash forecast. Rolling planning, flexible visualization of budget reports. Drill down to the source documents. Enterprise performance dashboard, and more other options. This is everything what I want to tell you about 1C ERP World Edition today. Thank you for your attention.